Today we're going to talk about killing a cover crop that you've added to your corn and soybean system. Cover crops are a great way to cover the soil following corn or soybean harvest in the fall, all through the winter, and then before your next planting of corn or soybeans. It's a great way to decrease soil erosion from wind and water. It's a great way to scavenge nitrogen that would have left the system through leaching, and to keep phosphorus, which is attached to soil, in the system. We don't want to have our soils uncovered throughout the winter, and in the Midwest, in a corn and soybean system, we have this a lot. We really need to be adding cover crops to those systems to keep that soil covered. So, when we want to kill that cover crop in the spring, there's some ways we can do that. If we chose to plant a non-overwintering cover crop like oats, we will not have the cover crop to kill in the spring. So if you're thinking about just taking the first step and adding a cover crop, you might want to try oats or a spring small grain like spring wheat, spring rye, spring barley, and planting it in the fall, and then it will die and you'll just have the residue. You won't have any living green biomass to kill in the spring. But if you planted an overwintering cover crop such as winter wheat, winter rye, winter triticale, winter barley, hairy vetch, any of the legumes, then you'll have that crop in the spring and you'll have to terminate it. A couple different ways to terminate a cover crop include burning it down with a glyphosate, post, or 2,4-D, although we would not recommend 2,4-D. You would want to kill it before corn planting, 5 to 10 days before you're going to plant the field of corn. We want to give that cover crop enough time to die before the corn is planted. Since corn is a grass, and a winter small grain is also a grass, the corn is not as forgiving following a grass. So we want to make sure that cover crop is good and dead before we plant corn. If we're planting before soybeans, since soybeans are a legume, they're more forgiving. You could kill a cover crop one day and plant soybeans the next day if you want. You could also no-till drill soybeans into a living cover crop and then kill it with glyphosate 5 to 10 days later. So you've got some flexibility before soybeans. Now if we think about the date of planting corn or soybeans in the spring, we plant corn earlier than soybeans, and so the cover crop is usually not very tall. So we usually don't have a problem of the cover crop getting away from us, where one day it's very short, it might rain a bunch, and we get some heat, and then the cover crop takes off. We usually don't have that before corn because the planting date of corn is so early. Usually the system is usually the weather is cold enough that we don't get the cover crop getting away from us. But we need to be good managers and be paying attention. If the cover crop gets taller than our work boot, we need to be burning it down. We need to be killing it. So about 6 to 9 inches is about the height, the maximum height that we really want that cover crop to get before we kill it. Before soybeans, we have more of a potential problem of the cover crop getting away from us since we plant soybeans later. So we really want to be watching that cover crop and making sure it doesn't get too tall. There's a fine balance between getting the benefits from the cover crop by having enough biomass and by not killing it too early, and letting the cover crop get too big and it potentially tying up nitrogen because it's too big and there's too much carbon there that could tie up nitrogen. So we want to stay in the 6 to 9 inch height range for a small grain to make sure we're in the area where we're getting the benefits, but we're not getting it too tall and it's tying up any nitrogen. So if glyphosate is not part of your program, and glyphosate is not the only way to kill the cover crop, you might want to try tillage. Some farmers like to till the cover crop, maybe do 1 or 2 passes, and plant immediately, corn or soybeans. Other farmers like to kill it, let the soil mellow out maybe for another 10 days, and then plant. It really depends on your system if you're able to wait that long. Before corn, if tillage is your only option and you do not have the ability to use an herbicide, you better make sure that cover crop does not get too tall. If you're organic and you're trying to do winter rye or winter wheat before corn, you need to be very vigilant and check to make sure that it does not get away from you. If you have animals in your system and you'd be able to graze the cover crop, then you can at least reduce its growth before tillage by a grazing event. That'll push the cover crop back, keep it shorter, and then when you till it under, it'll be easier to kill. If you're leery about using a winter small grain before corn in an organic system, you may want to just do a fall oat or a fall small spring grain that will die, and you'll have the residue there but no living biomass in the spring to kill. Before soybeans, there are another option that has become popular in Wisconsin and sometimes works in Iowa. If you plant a winter small grain the fall before a soybean crop, it will overwinter and it will be there in the spring. And if you could delay soybean planting by maybe 10 to 15 days, you'd be able to allow that cover crop to reach past flowering stage where it's creating seeds and becoming, it's going to death, it's going to senescence. When the cover crop gets to that point, a mowing or a crimping or a stalk chopping of that cover crop will kill it. But you've got to make sure that the entire cover crop field is all at the same maturity and that the maturity that it's at is close to setting seed. You want to make sure that you kill it when it's wasting its energy in the roots and putting it into seeds, but that those seeds aren't viable yet so that you'd potentially be planting another crop. So you want to catch the crop when it's past the dough stage, when it's past senescence, and stalk chop it, crimp it, or some sort of flail chopper that's going to break it up and kill it and create a nice mulch. When you have that mulch, then you could no-till drill soybeans into that mulch and potentially not have to control weeds in the soybean the following year. The mulch also keeps soil moisture in the surface of the soil and helps that seed germinate. Now, if it is a dry spring, for any system with cover crops, whether you're using glyphosate or using tillage, you want to kill that cover crop soon. If we do have low snowfall and we don't have a lot of rain in the spring and there's a potential drought period coming, kill the cover crop as soon as possible because it will take soil moisture out of the ground and could potentially harm cash crop germination. So we need to be vigilant in the spring, but don't let this scare you. Farmers are using cover crops and making it work in a corn and soybean system. There's just management that needs to happen with it. So we've talked about using glyphosate to kill it in the spring. We've talked about using tillage. You could use a mixture of tillage and glyphosate if you'd want to till the cover crop in and see if you got a good kill off of it. And if you didn't, you could follow up with a glyphosate application. We've also talked about using a flail chopper or mowing or stalk chopping or crimping that cover crop when it's reaching senescence before planting soybeans. Or we've talked about no-till drilling soybeans into a living cover crop and then burning it down. All of these are options, including using a non-overwintering cover crop, which would die in the winter. All of these are options to killing that cover crop before planting corn or soybeans. So a cover crop adds a great deal of flexibility to our system, and it allows us to potentially offset stored feed costs, keep soil in place, keep nitrogen and phosphorus in place that would have left our system, and keep our soil covered. Adding a cover crop to a system has been found scientifically to improve that system over time and allow farmers to potentially get in the field sooner in the spring and have better yield and crop stability over time. Now, if it's spring and you have not been able to plant your corn or your soybeans, or you've chosen not to, you may want to take that cover crop all the way to grain harvest, which for a small grain could happen in late June or July. There is some work being done with farmers keeping some acres aside for grain harvest so that they can have that grain to then plant on their next year's cover crop fields. That's also an option. So there's plenty of options to adding cover crops to your corn and soybean system. At the very least, try out some, and you can contact Practical Farmers of Iowa or the Iowa Learning Farm or also look online at the Midwest Cover Crops Council or Managing Cover Crops Profitably, which is an encyclopedia of cover crop information. Thank you.